Divorce lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen someone F over their spouse? She took the cats. He wanted the cats. Looked like courts would give him the cats. She had the cats put down. Bad separation. Wife filed a restraining order on the husband. Very common. Wasn't a terrible guy, but not great either. A year into the divorce, his mother was dying. He asked his sister to speak with his ex-wife and asked to bring the kids to see her in the hospital before she died. The wife never did. Instead, she went to the court and said he violated the restraining order by trying to contact her. You can't contact someone through another party. He admitted it and explained the situation, but was found in breach of the order. His mother died while he was locked up, and the wife never brought the kids to see her. Story from my parents, who are lawyers. So throughout the divorce proceedings, there was a car that was a huge point of contention between the husband and wife. After months and months of saying he would never let the wife have the car, the husband concedes in exchange for something great, like one of their summer houses. It turns out he had been driving the car for 3 hours every day in a big loop around the city, putting thousands and thousands of miles on it, basically making it worthless. The amount of planning and spite that went into that was amazing. I did some consulting work for 2 divorce attorneys when I was in grad school. Their client was a career airline pilot. His wife worked part-time, so there was a huge income disparity. It was an ugly divorce during the process, but before the final decree, tax time rolled around. The wife's attorney calls my guys and says her accountant just called. If they can just share their W-2s and file jointly, they each stand to save about $8,000 over married filing separately. My guys took that info to the husband. He says, F her. Losing $8,000 is going to be way worse for her than it will be for me. Cold as ice, man. Not me, but a guy I worked with 10 years ago. I guess it counts as a revenge. I worked with a guy who really stuck it to his ex-wife. When I met him, he was working in a sporting goods store making $8 an hour. He was not really like the other retail monkeys. He was older, well-groomed, well-spoken, clearly educated, etc. One night after work, he gets into his car, and I couldn't help but notice that it was a very nice newish Jaguar. I asked him how he could afford it, and he explained it to me. He had been an SVP at a well-known Fortune 50 company, which I will not mention the name of, pulling in $300K with bonuses and stock options. He was married, but the marriage fell apart, and in the divorce, she demanded that she get the house and 40% of his wages. He and his lawyer somehow managed to get her to agree to let him keep the house in exchange for 75% of his pay, no dollar figure or employer specified, lol. As soon as she took the settlement, he quit his job and looked for a minimum wage job. He said to me that she gets 75% of nearly nothing now. He had other money stashed away, so he didn't even need the job, and he had the house and its equity as well. Also, no kids, so there was no child support, just alimony. She was furious, of course, and tried to resue him, but failed at least once, and when she claimed that the settlement was not keeping her in the lifestyle she was accustomed to, he simply told the judge that the divorce was traumatic to him, and he could no longer do his old job as a result. At least at that time, she did not manage to get out of the deal. Not sure how it all ended, but I thought it was effing brilliant, if not crazy level spiteful. He was a good employee too, good with customers, showed up on time, no bullshit absenteeism or anything like that. He claimed he loved each payday because it reminded him how little she was getting. Over here in the Netherlands, most legal costs are paid for by the government if your income is below a certain threshold. In practice, this means that if one of the spouses in a divorce has little to no income and the other one has a normal income, the one with the normal income will have to pay a lot. Of the process drags on. Considering there are plenty of ways to drag it on, I've seen cases approach ridiculous amounts of billable hours. There is a catch to this, however. Your lawyer is paid a set amount if he or she is paid by the government. However, should the money you receive after a divorce or W/E exceed a certain number, you are expected to pay your own lawyer, which is the reason we still keep track of the hours in these cases. So this one woman who thought she was screwing over her ex-husband by dragging the divorce over multiple years got a payout of $40K by the end of it. Unfortunately for her, she had to surrender most of that straight back in lawyer costs. There was a certain sense of justice in there. Also proves time and again that when there is conflict, the only true winners are usually the lawyers. My ex and I separated before the divorce. She agreed to watch the dog while I found a new place. She had the dog put down instead. Not a lawyer, but when I was a kid my parents got divorced. My mom met a guy on the internet and left my dad for him. My sisters and I were all teenagers, and being that my mom had never really been around, decided that we all wanted to live with him. We all had to write a letter stating our wishes, and it was understood that we would stay with him. My mom didn't even seem to care. Additionally, my dad had this retirement account from his old job. He wasn't rich at all, and had worked his ass off for everything he'd ever had. When he got hurt on the job he could have sued, but was promised that in exchange for him not suing, they'd keep him around. Instead they canned him, and he left with about 100k, I think, in a 401k type account that he'd been saving for nearly 30 years. Lastly, my dad had his house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath brick house that was all of about 800 SF. It wasn't much at all, but my dad loved the place. My mom couldn't stand that house and wanted to move for as long as I could remember. That was another contentious subject that led to the divorce. He'd been paying on it forever, and when he left his old job, he took out a small chunk and paid it off. Anyway, their separation is progressing, and it's understood we are living with him. She was so in love with this internet guy that she didn't care. He was in school halfway around the country, and she was going to move there to be with him. We knew we'd get by just fine. They seemed amicable, and it was understood how this would all play out. The day in court finally comes, and instead of what we all assumed, even my dad's lawyer, she goes to the court with all these crazy claims. He was an abusive alcoholic. He beat us and my mom nightly. He was crazy and no one would be safe in his care. My mom got full custody. She got 50% of his house and 50% of his retirement account. My dad was stunned that judgment would basically bankrupt him. In order for him to keep the house, he'd essentially have to clean out his retirement account and give her everything. The night of their divorce I went over to see him. He was almost catatonic. He just stared off in space the entire time and would mumble whenever I asked him a question. I've never seen anyone like that ever. My birthday was 2 days away, and I asked if he wanted to do something for my birthday and he just answered with, "Your mom has full custody. I will if she allows me to see you." I asked if I could drive his old truck to school since I didn't yet have a car, and he just said no, that I needed to call my mom and have her pick me up. So that's what I did. And the next day in school, the day before my birthday, I'm sitting in a lunchroom when I hear, "Hey, isn't that your grandpa?" from a buddy of mine. I look over and see my grandpa and a cop making their way across the lunchroom toward me. They told me to grab my stuff, and in the office I found my sister there as well. We rode home with them, where we were also met by my little sister, and that's where they told us that our dad had killed himself shortly after I left the previous night. To make matters worse, it all happened so quickly that nothing had been finalized. My mom dropped all her paperwork and legally became a widow and got everything: house, retirement and his insurance policy. She also got social security benefits for us, a fact we didn't find out until much later. She basically took all the money and moved across the country with her new man, leaving us to care for ourselves for the most part. And to this day, when asked about raising us, she'll spin this story of a young widow doing her best to raise 3 kids on her own. My dad basically appealed custody over and over, bringing in new friends to back his character. This forced my mum to seek a barrister, lawyer to defend herself. My dad was a massive problem gambler, had no permanent home, and was pretty shit at practical life stuff, nutrition, education, etc. This forced my mum to dig into all her savings, to pay legal fees, to keep a child. Anybody with a sound mind would know is much more capable than my dad. So in the end my dad basically made my mother bankrupt trying to get custody over a child he wouldn't have been able to raise. 10/10. My dad actually got F'd by his divorce lawyer during my parents' divorce last year. My dad and my sister have never gotten along, and over the years it got more and more strained. They eventually got into a physical fight which led to a CPS report and him getting slapped with a child abuse record. They labeled it as confirmed but isolated, so he's not on the registry and you can only see it with certain background checks. In this case, my mom was obviously going to get full custody of my sister. My mom also wanted to give my dad the house, and his cars, and his money pit of a boat. Lawyer decided, because my dad is stubborn as F, that he would string old dad along. Lawyer spent hours with my dad trying to convince him that dad could get more money and custody from my mom. They did a divorce mediation, so they wouldn't have to go to court, and lawyer dragged it out for 4 hours. The whole time he was riling my dad up, thinking he could get things like the original down payment on the house, half custody of my sister, my mom's car, etc. At the end of the 4 hours of mediation, lawyer told my dad he should take the deal that my mom and her lawyer had originally offered in the first place, and dad signed that. So he paid about $12,000 in completely unnecessary legal fees. My stepdad has been divorced twice before. Both marriages had kids involved. First divorce was mutual and had shared custody of the kids. Second was because he was cheated on and also involved shared custody of kids. Wife 1 lived out of state and kept no showing, forcing costly legal action every time he wanted to see his kid. Wife 2 was initially supportive of him through this until they had kids themselves and the cost became too much. Wife 1 wanted him to give up legal rights to their kids, and after years and years of legal battles that nearly bankrupted them, Wife 2 basically gave him an ultimatum: give up the kids or get divorced. He knew that getting divorced from Wife 2 could result in him never seeing his other kids either, so eventually he was forced into giving up kid 1. A few years later Wife 2 cheats on him. They get divorced. Wife 2 tells the kids it was him that cheated, but to never mention it to him in case he gets angry. Initially they were splitting custody very evenly, but eventually Wife 2 figured out that she would get more money if she was technically sole custodian, and he would see them on that basis because he loves his children. So to arrange for this to happen, she accused him of molesting their youngest child, then used that accusation to gain full custody before the charge was dropped due to total lack of evidence. Then she tells the kids that he did molest them, again something he didn't know she told them for years. Upshot is that he was forced to give up first kids permanently by one wife, and then second wife had the rest of his kids think he was a cheater and XL predator, and thus be terrified of him, and never truly love him, so she could save face and pick up a larger check. Like Tammy 1 and Tammy 2 on crack.